Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Advocacy at Work. I am your host, Tim McDonald, and today I am joined by somebody who's on the different side of the globe from me, Chris Brooks. How you doing, Chris?
I'm good, thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Well, yeah, it's early morning for me and nighttime for you. But I can't wait to jump into this conversation. And just for reference, if you're listening, I actually became aware of the Ryan Bowman Foundation in Australia based upon something that came across my LinkedIn feed about a month or so ago. And Chris immediately reached out to me, thanking me for sharing it. And here we are recording a podcast episode. So this is how online networking works, right?
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Well, great. Well, why don't you just, tell us, Chris, a little bit about, your story and what brought us together today, and what kind of transpired. I know we could probably talk about the whole episode just about that, but maybe condense it a little bit for us and then we can kind of take it from there.
Yeah, well, I shifted back to Mount Gambier in South Australia back in 22 to actually look after my folks who were both pretty ill, and my father ended up passing away. And in leading up to that, I reconnected with an old school friend, Deb, my now wife, and we literally had one good month as a couple trying to reconnect. And then Deb's son, my stepson Ryan, he got very sick and was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that happened on Christmas Eve of that year. So we effectively did what we needed to do. Deb dropped everything, basically moved to Adelaide where Ryan needed to go for treatment for this, and started off his initial treatment process. And at the same time, Deb was, we hadn't even thought about moving in together and all that sort of carry on. And, Deb's property that she was in at the time went on the market, so she had to find somewhere to live. And I said, well, you and Ryan can move in with me. So, I'd known Ryan a month and, we'd never connected. I'd met Ryan's almost 12-year-old daughter, Lacey, but very, very briefly. So Deb and I were pretty much on and off apart. Deb was living at Cancer Council House in Adelaide, and while we're talking about that facility, Tim, amazing people, absolutely amazing. Country people would be absolutely lost with that facility, and it's just a godsend. We lived for 8 months between Cancer Council House and the Royal Adelaide Hospital, where Deb and I would take it in turns, staying with Ryan. So Ryan, we'll get into this a bit later, but he had received an acquired brain injury from one of his surgeries when he was little. So he needed to have someone there advocating for him at all times. So that's how that all come about.
Well, and I'm guessing, I know it was probably a very difficult time for both of you going through that. What brought you to actually want to create this foundation in his memory?
Yeah. So Ryan was a typical, he was covered in tattoos. He looked like a tough guy on the outside, but he was really a gentle soul. And people judged him a lot, which really annoyed me. Towards the end of Ryan's life, he would always ask for me, always say, where's Chris? I need Chris here to help me through all this crap, because no one would listen to him. In fact, no one really talked to him. And you being through what you've been through, Tim, is if you don't have that person there advocating for you at the bedside, it's a difficult process. And that was my role. We had some really good support whilst we were in Adelaide, but our journey at the local health facility here in Mount Gambier was just horrendous. We had over 50 ambulance trips. We had seven air ambulance trips between Mount Gambier and Adelaide for Ryan and other family members. It was always a battle, and I could see that if we weren't asking the questions or pushing the buttons, we'll get nowhere. And we're not the only ones, unfortunately. So on the back of that, Ryan eventually got very sick. He went into final heart failure. His heart specialist, who's one of Australia's leading heart specialists, ended up getting to a point where he took the sugar coating off, spoke to Deb and said, he's got 12 months, and we got 6. So Ryan's last, I guess, 4 or 5 weeks were very difficult. We struggled to get support. We didn't even know there was local hospice, in-house hospice care available. That particular facility didn't talk to the hospital. They don't get along. There's no information that comes out of the local hospital in that space. And Ryan's end-of-life care was horrendous. In fact, we treat our pets better than the end-of-life care that Ryan received at the local hospital. After Ryan passed on February the 16th, 2025, I wrote a letter to the CEO of the local health network, and she responded a few weeks later. We had our inaugural meeting, and our push for all of this was to have Ryan remembered because of the way he was treated with his end-of-life care. I badgered the then Health Minister, Chris Picton. I sent him 75 odd emails, even to a point where one of those emails he responded with was a cease and desist, but I kept pushing, and we eventually got a face-to-face with Chris, and he's out of that portfolio now. The relationship I had with his advisor at the time was quite good, so we got an audience with him. From that meeting where the CEO of the local health network was present, we got an independent inquiry commissioned, and that independent inquiry found that the local hospital failed in all 9 levels or 9 areas of end-of-life care. We found a nurse asleep on duty at 2:15 in the morning when Ryan was having a heart attack. We had nurses refuse care. All sorts of things happened. Our plan for Ryan was not followed one little bit, and it was terrible. So from that, we went down various paths, Tim. We spoke to lawyers. I've got a friend in Melbourne who's a medical lawyer, very high-powered medical lawyer. I sent him all the information. He said, mate, this is a great case. This is a no-brainer, win-win. Where is it? And I told him it's South Australia, and he said, good luck with that. So very difficult to go down that legal path in South Australia, which wasn't our main driver. We just wanted answers. We wanted people held accountable for making bad judgments or not making judgments at all, not following our plan, etc. That sort of moved around a washing machine, if you like, for quite some time, 6 months into 8 months. And then at one point, we weren't getting anywhere with the local CEO, even though the findings were that they failed in every area. So I emailed the board, and within 24 hours of me emailing the board, we had another meeting. From that meeting, they decided that they would run a scholarship program in Ryan's name, which is the upskilling of local healthcare workers in the space of end-of-life care. We still weren't getting much traction, and in one weekend, I said to my wife, that's it, I'm setting up a foundation. This is going to happen. So I set up the foundation in a weekend, including all the documents, all the legal aspects of it, all our policies, all our procedures, our logo, everything in a weekend. Launched it. I've got a friend in Melbourne who's a great IT guy. We put together a website. We launched it. The ACNC people who give you DGR registration for donating of money, they couldn't believe what we'd done in a short space of time. They were all over it. They pushed it through very quickly. In fact, the lawyer from the DGR from the ATO, she said, Chris, I've been doing this a long time and I've never seen anything like this happen so quickly. And, you know, that was like, you know, I was just doing what I thought was best for Ryan to be remembered. So from that, we created our foundation, and it got buy-in from everyone across the country, from the previous CEO of Palliative Care Australia, Camilla Rowland, who's now moved to the ANMF, which is Australian Nursing Midwifery Federation. She's part of the training side of that now. The local Palliative Care South Australia CEO, Shyla Mills. We reached out to Heart Kids. We reached out to Rio's Legacy in Sydney, who builds, his foundation builds hospice centres for paediatric end-of-life people. Doors kept opening like you wouldn't believe. So out of that, we created 4 pillars. And the first pillar is something called Ryan's Voice. So in Australia, we have a mandated escalation protocol in 3 states, that being Queensland, called Ryan's Rule, New South Wales, called Raise It, and Western Australia, I think it's called Aisha's Rule, and I've probably got the spelling or pronunciation of that wrong. Even though Ryan's Rule had been in place in Queensland since 2011, we reached out to the creators, we reached out to everybody in that space, and then we presented all that information to the state government with the incoming Minister Blair Boyer. We had one meeting literally 2 weeks after he'd been named as the new health minister, and people still to this day could not believe that we got a meeting with him so quickly. My initial take on that meeting was that I didn't think he was interested at all, and I felt like it was a bit of an uphill battle. Boy, I was wrong. So he has a very, very good reputation in South Australia as a minister. He gets a lot of stuff done very quickly, which is, you know, you've got to tip your hat to someone who actually is a doer opposed to a talker. We went through the various learnings from another foundation type business. I think they're a type of non-for-profit called Carers SA, and met with the CEO there, Julia Overton, and she introduced me to a lady by the name of Alison Willis. Alice has sat on a number of boards in that national patient safety space. She was involved with AFRA for years. She's a registered nurse, and it was like looking in a mirror. Her and I just clicked. And out of that, we created a plan as to how we'd approach the minister in getting this escalation protocol over the line. What didn't hurt was that you would be familiar with a foundation in the US called the Daisy Foundation. Yes. Mm-hmm. We're an associate partner of the Daisy Foundation, and Bonnie and Mark Barnes have been amazing. They're just incredible people. Their story is very similar to our story with their son, Patrick. And they have a lady on their team who runs Daisy Europe, Carolyn Fox. And she's very good friends with the just recently outgoing Chief Medical Officer at SA Health, called Professor Michael Cusack. So we had a little bit of an side door entrance into that space. When we went to our last meeting with the health minister a few weeks ago, I went in dressed up, thinking I was up for another fight. I took Alison along. She was of the same opinion. We need to really push with this. She said her bit, I said my bit. The Minister Blair, he passed it over to Professor Cusack, and Professor Cusack had a summary of all my findings in front of him. And he said, Chris, I agree with every single point you've made here. We're mandating this escalation protocol, and effectively South Australia, from the start of the new year, will have a mandated escalation protocol in place, which every single SA Health facility has to follow to the letter. And it would be an opportunity for people to, if things are not going well, they get to ring a number and then they have to act. So it's been proven in other states to save lives. We could have used it with Ryan. Others could have used it. A next door neighbour here in Mount Gambier could have used it with her daughter who passed away recently. And, you know, Tim, you've probably already got an idea that I like to chat, but I was lost for words. And when Alice and I got downstairs, she looked at me and she said, "Chris, you did this." And I said, "Did I? You sure they weren't already doing it?" And she goes, "No, Chris, they had no idea." And she said, "We've been trying to get this over the line for 20 years, and you did it in under 8 months. And you did this." So we achieved our initial goal. So my wife said to me, "Where to from here, hun?" And I said, "Well, we've got to raise some money for our upskilling of regional nurses in the end of life space." So in Australia, Tim, which is a bit sad when you think about it, because everyone will experience end of life at some point, there's 0.3 specialists for every 100,000 people, which is terrible. You know, general nurses and doctors do an amazing job. 95% of them do a great job. There's 5% that, you know, we've seen with our own eyes that don't do a good job. And even specialists in that space who are now teachers. We met with a guy by the name of Jerry O'Callaghan, and Jerry's now Associate Dean at Adelaide University, who's training the next 17,000 odd nurses and doctors coming through the system. So he's part of that journey. And he said, "Chris, sometimes we come to work and we don't present the best version of ourselves, but we focus on the 95% that do." And that's the same in any industry, anywhere. So that's the approach that we've taken with this, Tim. We're looking for that 95% that do a great job. We're working really hard behind the scenes to bring the DAISY Foundation's elevation of nurses and general healthcare, to put them in the spotlight on a global scale. We're making massive inroads into that space. Deb recently presented our first scholarship to a local lady. Can't remember her first name. Bowman is her second name, and I'm just really sorry that I can't remember her first name. My wife would be able to tell me if she was here. She's the perfect person for this job. And the whole idea of our scholarship program is to pay for as many scholarships as we can initially in regional South Australia to upskill local nurses, healthcare workers, AMBOs, whoever wants to get involved in that space, so that they then become the mentors in their given regional settings. And eventually we'll roll that out nationally. We're working with Palliative Care SA to get a version of Ambulance Wish, which runs in the region, in the city sections into regional South Australia as well. And we have a couple of AMBOs on our team. Shane Haggis, who, if he was a soldier, he'd be SAS, and Rebecca Cutting, who's been working in that space for trying to get Ambulance Wish across the line for ages. Our director of governance is a lady that heads up multiple non-for-profits in Adelaide. Kirsty Whitehead, she's a gun in her own space. She's has children with rare cancers. She's spends a lot of time with SAID, which is South Australian Intellectual Disability Association. She can open doors that we can't open. So she's been a massive help in that space. We had a lady reach out from Northern New South Wales, Peter Taylor. Peter founded a law firm called Unbundled Law, and she reached out to us on the back of, she had a similar experience with her grandma and her grandma's end-of-life care. So she's part of our team. She's offered her services pro bono, which is fantastic. Hopefully we never have to use it from a legal point of view, but she brings her own set of skills to the team. We've just recently brought on another lady, Nicole. She's had her own battles with the health system, So she approaches it from a different angle. So our team at this point in time is five with Deb's son Lockie, who's a carer. He runs his own care, looks after people with disabilities, etc. He's sitting in the background, and hopefully one day he'll take over the foundation when Deb and I are too old to do it. So, Tim, in a nutshell, that's it. What we do.
Oh, that's it. I don't think that's it. I think you got plenty more to do, and amazing what you have accomplished in such a short amount of time. I mean, absolutely amazing. And I don't want anybody to think that if you start doing your own thing that you can expect results that quick, because over here we like to say in the States, at least as far as like changing policy, it usually takes about 5 to 10 years to happen, and you did it in just a few short months.
It's interesting you say that, Tim, because we met with a fellow by the name of Gerald Hickson out of Vanderbilt University in the US. Now, I stalked Gerald on LinkedIn based on his skill set. And it turned out that Gerald had put in place a escalation protocol in that similar space at a local health network called Callan in Adelaide, which is Central Adelaide Local Health Network, which was to support the professionals along those same lines. So if you're an intern or a nurse or wasn't happy with the way one of the doctors was treating you, you had the, the professional standards protocol, if you like. They could elevate it to a point where there was a discussion around it. So Gerald Hickson and Jerry O'Callaghan was part of that team, have been driving that program in Adelaide since 2020. So when we met with Gerald Hickson, Jerry invited us for a face-to-face, my wife and I, and another lady, Deborah Howard, who's part of the teaching team, and want us involved in that lived experience space. And both Jerrys, Jerry 1 and 2, both said that to get an escalation protocol over the line like this takes between 3 and 5 years, like you just said, right? We're exceptionally fortunate that we've got a minister, and I'll keep saying his name, Blair Boyer. He's going places, that guy. He's a good-looking rooster too, if you like, but happily married with young children. He got it. He understood what we're trying to do. And it's very rare that you have an opportunity to make such an impact with someone with some pulling power. And he effectively made it happen. So, we decided, Tim, that instead of continually complaining, we wanted to bring solutions to the table. And this is what we did. We created a solution based on 3 different states' approach. And when you present all the data and how it works, you make the recommendations to those people who do make the decisions, they got no way to go but, okay, let's do this. So, happy days.
No, absolutely. And I love that about bringing the solutions instead of complaining. It's like, it's so important, I think, for people to realize it's easy to get frustrated and express that frustration, but it's different when you actually think about it and present some options and solutions that allow people to see maybe we have a common ground here instead of just being confrontational.
Yeah, look, right from the very beginning, Tim, and I know you experienced this through your journey yourself, is that we've always said to the caregivers, the specialists, the doctors, the nurses, that the carer, the person at the bedside with their loved one, they're the center of the universe. They know more about the individual in that bed than doctors and nurses ever will. And the minute that they dismiss the opinions of that carer, it's over. Because no matter how good you are at your given trade, you can miss stuff. And, the nuances of a loved one, breathing pattern might shift just slightly. Temperature of their skin might feel a little bit different than what it normally does. Doctors and nurses miss that stuff because they're so busy. And if you're there to be able to say, hey, I think something's not quite right, and they do listen, it can save someone's life and at least get their care to a point where they get better quickly. So that's, we've driven that through to those people from day one. You have to listen to the carer. Deb's journey with Ryan, 33 years as a carer, and we'll get into Ryan's conditions shortly, but Deb's book that she's written, and by the way, if anyone's listening, we're trying to get it published and no one wants to listen. And this book it's already been used by Flinders University here in Australia for teachings, but we need to get this thing out there so people can, see what can take place over a 33-year period. So if you want to sort of get into a bit about Ryan, Tim, we can do that.
Yeah, let's do that.
So Ryan was born in 1991. He was very bright young man. He had some issues from some swelling and bits and pieces, and there was some stuff missed in early scans when Deb was pregnant with Ryan, and it turned out that Ryan ended up having 5 congenital heart defects. These days, it's very, very rare. So Ryan was a 1 in 10 million birth. If Mount Gambier Hospital, for example, was to see Ryan today for the first time, they wouldn't see another Ryan for 200,000 years. That's how rare his condition was. So, Deb basically was it for Ryan. Deb's got 4 children, and Ryan was the center of her universe there for a very, very long time. He spent years in Women's and Children's Hospital in Adelaide. He spent time at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne. He had 5 open heart surgeries by the time he was 5. And the last one he had, he got an acquired brain injury from a blockage in one of the lines, which meant that Ryan then had to learn to talk, walk, eat again. And prior to that, he was a very bright, intelligent young man. He came good, learned to live with his genital heart defects. He was a football lover, as in Australian rules football. He was wanted to be a gangster, loved his cars, loved to go fishing off the beach, all the things that most people like to do when they're in their teens, early 20s. He was a bit of a ruffian there for a little while, got into a little bit of trouble, but we all have at some point in our lives. He met a girl, and Lacey was born. His passion was cars. I flew to Adelaide at one point, bought a little Suzuki Jimny that he wanted to do up and put lift kits and turbos and everything else that he wanted to do. He bought it, drove it once, and it sat in the driveway for 8 months. So all those things that you think you could do when you're young, you just couldn't do. So when we got the news about Ryan's heart failure, our life changed overnight. Up till then, it was hard work, living with a 33 or 31-year-old at that point, 32-year-old, effectively giving him the control of the remote in the main lounge room, if you like. So, I spent, not that it matters, Tim, I spent, 6 to 12 months watching my shows lying on the bed in the bedroom, whereas Ryan would have the run of the house effectively. When we found out that he was in final stages of heart failure, our life changed. We didn't care after that. Mate, you do what you want to do and we'll do it. Some of the things, Tim, that came out of that journey was we found it incredibly difficult to get support for him. He needed home oxygen. something that should have been able to be provided to him overnight. It took us 3 weeks to get home oxygen. In the end, we, in Australia, they have an insurance scheme called the NDIS, and Ryan's NDIS provider, she was amazing job. Ryan's carer that we got through that facility, amazing person. She became Ryan's best friend, if you like, older lady, became his sounding block, tell her stuff that he would never tell us. And without that support, it would have been extremely difficult. But the trouble with Australia, particularly in regional settings, is the left hand doesn't talk to the right hand. And I had to send emails to ministers to get people to listen. We need this. How do we go about getting it? And within 24 hours of doing that, you'd have it. And it shouldn't be like that. So part of the journey from the foundation's perspective, Tim, is to work with other foundations in that space and see if we can not change the narrative. Our main goal, if you like, if there is such a thing, is to change culture. If we can change culture, we'll change everything. That's the
Love it. So I know I usually ask this a lot earlier, but because we do talk about advocacy, I always like to ask how you would define advocacy. And I love it from this perspective because I think you're one of my first guests who's not an actual patient or came from a patient perspective. It's more from the carer perspective. So just interested in how you define advocacy.
I can pigeonhole that in 2 areas. I can pigeonhole it from being the voice of the patient, and I can also pigeonhole it from Deb's perspective, as having patience. And my wife, look, if Ryan and my wife have taught me anything over this journey, is patience. I guess from an advocacy point of view, when I first came back to Geelong, I was really, came back to Mount Gambier from Geelong to look after my folks. I needed a GP for the family. And I got very lucky in running into a GP by the name of Tasneem Khan. She's just the sweetest, most amazing GP I've ever had in my life. And she's our family GP now. Indian lady, just the sweetest person ever. And we were discussing different things in this space. And she originally came to Mount Gambier to work in ED, and she saw a bigger need for a GP that specializes in certain areas, which she does. And she said to me at one point, and this is around the advocacy question, Tim, she said, "Chris, if you don't ask, you don't get." And I've just lived that motto ever since I started becoming a carer for my mum, my dad, Ryan, my wife, me, and anyone. It's, you don't ask, you don't get. It's as simple as that. And I found, and my wife still doesn't understand where this saying comes from. I have a saying, is you get more flies with honey. So, when we were in that hospital setting, being that advocate for Ryan or my mother, I would take the nurse coming on for her shift or his shift aside and say, these are the nuances that you need to look out for with Ryan. If you do this, this, and this, he'll do whatever you want him to do. And the same thing for mum. And it was easy. But if you didn't have the opportunity to do it, you're getting what you got. And sometimes it was really bad. Sometimes it was brilliant. And overall, it was brilliant. But advocacy is, I think, from my point of view, it's being the voice of the person.
I love it. Let's take a break from talking about all this and get to know you a little bit better, Chris. So just a couple of little questions, just really easy and fun. Nothing talking about too heavy here. But what is your favorite color?
Blue.
And what is your favorite band or musician?
Oh, all of them. I love music in general. I'd have to say Beatles.
All right. And what's a place that you've always wanted to visit but never have?
Ireland.
Now, I usually ask this about you, but I think in Ryan's honor, we're going to ask about Ryan. So what is one thing that most people would be surprised to know about Ryan?
He was the best at picking multis in sporting events. So like placing a bet with multiple different lines to it. Like say Aussie rules, for example, first guy to kick a goal, most touches, most handballs, most marks. And I would say over a 12-month period, he missed one.
Wow.
So a bit like the movie Rain Man. When it comes to statistics with Australian rules football, Ryan knew where the kid was from, what town he played his footy at, what club he played his junior footy at, you know, whether he's going to make it or not. He was just brilliant at all that stuff. It was just his thing.
I love it. That is just one little thing that I think most people that only are close to him would know. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Now, I know that, you're asking, South Australia to legislate this formal right to carers to be heard. So if time, money, institutional gatekeeping were all off the table, what's the first thing you'd build so that no family ever has to fight to be heard again?
That work's being done, Tim. The other states have it in place, and it's really a copy-paste from South Australia's perspective. They'll put their spin on it. If everything was off the table and I had an endless pit of money, I would be trying to upskill as many local regional nurses, ambulance officers, orderlies, first-year doctors, registrars in end-of-life care. That would be my ultimate win, if you like. I've seen it with my own eyes. I'm sure other people have seen it with their eyes. We still have stories about people having poor end-of-life care. If I can use this as a bit of a tidbit, when we met with Chris Picton the first time around in 2025, I said to the people around the table at the time, I said, have you ever had to put a pet down? As in a dog or a cat or whatever. And yeah, they had. And I said, how peaceful was it? It was just amazing. There were tears, but yet the passing was peaceful, and it was almost like a joyous event, because you know that pet was no longer in pain. And then I said, imagine that in the opposite vein. Lots of pain, lots of screaming, horrible visuals. How does that happen to a human? How does it happen? So what we've found, Tim, is that there's massive gaps in the education of our new generation of nurses, and the learnings that they have in the space of end-of-life care is a very, very small segment of their training. It needs to be bigger. So we've taken on the challenge of paying for as many of those scholarships for individuals that we can. We don't have much money in our bank account at the minute, but we do have our first corporate sponsor, who happens to be HIT, a training organisation based out of Adelaide that has a branch in Mount Gambier called HIT SA. So many, many, many thanks to them. So we are working towards grants. We're looking pretty promising for a few grants that we've applied for, because the whole industry in this space knows there's gaps, and they need champions, if you like, to actually fill those gaps. We are working with a lady by the name of Claudia Verdun, who is a senior lecturer at Flinders University based in Queensland. And I've given her a task to create a training program that turns an individual into a scholar of palliative care, unlike an Oxford scholar. That would be my goal. So if we can get to that space in this end-of-life care scenario in Australia, we've kicked the goal.
I love it. Well, Chris, thank you so much for being here, and thank you and your wife Deb for making this all possible. And I love that. I know we have a saying here in the States, it's like turn your pain into purpose, right? And you guys have certainly done that in Ryan's, and making his legacy continue on. So, before we sign off, how can people learn more about the work that you guys are doing, get in touch with you, just share what, where people can connect and learn more?
Yep, thanks, Tim. Look, we're across all social media platforms. We have a Facebook page, the Ryan Bowman Legacy of Care Foundation. We're almost at 500 followers in a very short space of time, and that's on the back of a local councillor here in Mount Gambier called Josh Liner. Him and I definitely didn't see eye to eye early in the piece. There's a story behind that, which we could talk about another day. But Josh runs a local news online platform, and he shared our story, and his words that he wrote himself were brilliant. And I've got to tip my hat to him. Thank you, Josh, if you ever listen to this. His post has created I think we're almost at 500 likes on the actual post. It's been shared, I think, up to 30 times. From that, we've picked up a bunch of followers. We also have an Instagram page, which we're not super active on, but we should be. We're working on that. We have a LinkedIn page under the same, as you know, Ryan Bowman Legacy Care Foundation. And we have a website, and the website is ryanbowmanlegacy.org.au. And that's it. We can be contacted via the website. Just want to make it very clear, Tim, that we are working very closely with the Daisy Foundation. They have been trying to get into the mainland health networks for 25 years with no success. We have some good news in that space. The local health network here in Mount Gambier will be taking on the program. So it'll be the first in the mainland, which we're very proud of. And we're hoping to connect with Australia's chief nurse, who the Daisy team are working behind the scenes to connect with, and hopefully get it into mainstream health across the country. So lots of work.
Lots of exciting things happening, so be sure and check that out. And we will put all the links in the show notes for everybody to make it easy to get to all these organizations. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining us on Advocacy at Work today. And for anybody listening, if you aren't already, make sure you subscribe. Just go to advocacyatwork.com. Subscribe. You'll get our weekly podcast and then some blog posts that we do. We feature 3 people in advocacy each week, and some other news and articles that we put up on there. So if you're interested in what's happening in the advocacy space, sign up, subscribe, and thank you once again, Chris.
It's an absolute pleasure, mate. And if you're talking to Steve, he won't know me, but he'll know Glenn. So that'd be great. Thank you.